almost no snow at all. And the boys had been so excited about that, they literally went into the street to pull some snow back up onto the yard so they could try a snowman. The next year we got besieged.
Yeah, our winters have not been the way they used to be. So who
I
knows
was
what's
here
going
in
to happen this year?
What?
Who knows what's going to be this year?
Exactly.
How are you?
But yeah, I got to
Such a busy day
hopefully
yesterday.
get some of the leaves on tomorrow. Gosh, we've got leaves.
Well, my neighbor and a guy comes there last night. I was just going to get in the shower.
Just
By the time I got something on to go outside. Because 6 years ago,
No, apparently I'm not
yeah,
retired.
Jim and I planted two autumn blaze maple trees in our front yard. Because first started out with a regular red maple years ago after we got married. Well, that died. So then we planted a silver maple. I got tired of all the propellers and found out why they called them dirty maples. But it was getting, it needed to come down because
Sandy,
one opposite.
did you peel
was
potatoes
so
and whatever
hollow
too?
inside. I said, Jim,
I
that's
didn't
gotta
this
come
time, I
down.
have the last two times. I got home from work late
Then we wanted to
on,
replant something, and I said, I want some nice colorful
Monday.
trees. And so we
I
decided
needed to
on
let the
autumn
dog
leaves.
out and do a
So
couple
we
things.
planted
And I
his the
thought,
first week,
and
and
then
mine the second week.
who told me? Catherine said
Well,
they
my
had a
neighbor was
ton
going
of
to
people.
trim them.
Because it's at
Low-hanging
night,
branches
and
that
people
need
like
trimming badly. while
Gary and
we were in,
Felicia and I
Kansas.
guess Jeanette was
Well, when I
there.
got back, he said he brought
You
all
know,
the
they can come
equipment
at
stuff
night, but
ready
they
to
can't
take
come
care
during
of
the day.
those
Yeah.
trees. And
So I did, then it
noticed
made
that-
me feel better that I
and
missed,
Jim's
but
tree,
I had
which is the
said I
biggest
would
and the
come,
nicest,
and
because about
just
3
didn't
years
work out
ago,
that day.
lightning hit
you can only kill yourself
one of the
so
big
much
branches
every
on
day.
my trees that faced the street.
Be in so many
it looked like,
places.
a third of it was
Yeah,
gone. Well,
yesterday I
it's
stood
gradually
for
now,
4
the last
hours.
3 years started to fill in. But
Yeah, I
it's
flipped for
definitely not
5.
as nice and full as
Flipped for
Jim's
$5,
tree.
yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
a big split, so he called our guy
flip?
that cut down
No,
my
I don't
ash tree
know. I
because
didn't
of the
think so.
boars.
I do what we did
And,
at Sunset Highway.
So I didn't get outside in time to talk to them, so I don't know what the verdict is, whether
And
he's
we
going to
don't
be
have
able
many
to
rejects.
bolt it
No.
back together, which I don't think, because you can just see, it's just split.
They're
And then it
every
goes on
size.
down, and I think there's a
Every
couple other areas lower down on the
Yeah, of
other
course.
part of it
Um,
that's going to
What's
be
his name was there?
splitting.
Mark
Mark.
Sager.
It's-
So
I'm
his
afraid
were
it's going to have to.
perfect.
His are
cut down.
perfect. Everybody else tries to
Yeah,
make
I
it
know.
perfect.
It was just
It
11
tastes the
months ago
same.
today, he
It
just
just
passed
doesn't
away.
matter. As long as they can make it fairly big,
Here
so
that
it's a
with the
little
loose
uniform, you know.
So,
And
yeah,
it tastes the
and
same.
it's looking so pretty.
Oblong or round.
Exactly, that's what I
We
keep
can
saying.
hope. I
Just
lost a huge
put it on
oak,
the grill. Let's get
on one of the storms. And
It was
found out
long
that it was
yesterday.
hollow. Big oak tree, but it was hollow inside. It just- I don't know.
It was long yesterday.
Yes, for you too. It was very long yesterday.
Been a long couple days. It's all good.
He's a couple days younger than me.
What's that?
He's a couple days younger than me.
He is 1 or 2 days younger than me.
Yeah.
1 or 2. As long as you're up, do you want to close that one too? Perhaps you're a day younger than I am and walk that far.
Lots of that going around.
Yeah.
Thank you.
More than last week. We can have 4 of us last week. Yeah, what happened to everybody in Bible study?
It's easier to stay at home and watch it.
Collaborate.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
How's it going today?
Good. So
We're
far,
up.
so good.
So far, so good.
We're up.
That's what we like to hear. Hi, everybody online.
That's the scripture.
Genesis.
I have now successfully forgotten my charge cord for my laptop 3 days in a row.
Okay.
So
Genesis 33.
you can just pull up the Facebook feed on my phone.
Yes, sir.
Just so you know, that's what I'm doing. Just in case anybody hollers at us today for any reason.
These are These are interesting texts today. Odd.
Hi, Joan. Hi, Grandma. Hi, everybody else who's watching. They are interesting texts today.
Oh,
it's
my heart.
lovely, crew. We're going to be looking at Psalm 121, Genesis 32, and Luke chapter 18 today. And I think we're going to start with Psalm 121.
Oh, I was going to start
Or do you want to
with
start with Genesis? We can start with
Genesis
Genesis.
is so peculiar.
That's fine.
If we
can
step
start.
in, can we get out?
Well, maybe, maybe not. It'll be an adventure one way or the other.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and start with Genesis, and that's fine if we don't get out of Genesis. I don't know what I'm going to talk about in Luke yet, so it'll be great. We can just hang out there the whole time. Yeah, go for it.
Well, one more time, I looked at this and I slipped to Psalm 121 because I thought there's very little way that I don't know how to sort this fella out. It's such a peculiar text. So let us go ahead and read this interesting, very peculiar text.
22.
Set it up just a little bit.
Genesis chapter 32.
32
Yep.
verses 22 to 32. They cut off the last one, but they shouldn't cut off the last one. It's all part of the same complicated section. Jacob took his brother's blessing, fled to the land of Haran in Mesopotamia, the top of the Euphrates River, getting away from his brother Esau because he was afraid of him. He had taken his blessing, taken the blessing of the firstborn. There he met Rachel and he ended up marrying Leah, and it got very strange, and the two maids, and the time came that the Lord told him to go home. He'd prospered, he'd done well, go back, so he's on his way back with his wives and 4 wives and bunches of kids. And he gets there and he's afraid of Esau again. And so he sends much of his company, splits the company in 2, sends it across the rivers. One company in one area, one in another, so that if Esau comes and contends with him, at least he'll have some of his possessions and his people. Then he takes his wives and his children and he walks them through the Jabbok, one of the rivers kind of in the middle there. You've got the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, and the Jordan goes down here, and the Jabbok comes in right about in the middle. And so he's crossing through waters. He's taking his family through waters. He then is by himself in the camp, and he wrestles with a man, or Elohim, which is another word for God, or Ish the man, and you've got seemingly bits and pieces of ancient folklore, mythology, broken up pieces that we don't know where they come from. This is old stuff, and it's been kind of pasted together. And you've got names, and you've got possibly demons, and you've got walking through the rivers, which was the river gods. Oh yeah.
Yep.
So it's an odd thing. But we've got Jacob here alone wrestling with a man,
Someone.
God,
Depending on your translation, a man, a god, an angel. Who knows?
and the Hebrew uses both, so how do we know?
That's the fun part of the Hebrew. And there are, in these 9 verses, there are, at least 3 different sources. At least 3.
At least.
At least 3 different sources that, you can look at the language in the original and you can look at it and you can say, okay, this is clearly a copy-paste sort of thing from a couple of different places.
Oh, I love
So-
you said clear. Clearly?
Well,
Clearly?
none of it's clear. What we know is that there's definitely multiple sources.
Yeah.
Where those sources are from and which sources go with what are significantly less clear. So, yeah, that's fair.
Oh, let's just read the happy English. But please, can we at least read the whole section? So
We can, but the
we
last
can.
verse is left off for a reason.
You know this reason. I do not know this reason.
It just is this tack on. It's just a tack on to the end of it. That's what it feels like.
It's in a happy little section, and
I'm
it's
not
all
saying it's
composed.
a happy little section.
Okay.
I'm just saying that it's
Children.
tacked on. So.
Children.
Yes, let's get going. Okay. Pat, would you start us with Genesis 32, starting with verse 22?
The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok.
Mhm.
He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. How far do you want me to go?
That's fine,
Okay.
thanks. Would you? Thank you.
Yeah. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me."
So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God,
Mhm.
and with humans, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed I don't know how you say that.
Peniel, who knows?
Peniel, limping because of his hip. Are we not supposed to read 32?
No, you can read 32.
Thank you.
Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip socket at the thigh muscle.
What does that have to do with anything?
Well, but it's all part of that little section. It's funny, what does most of this have to do with anything? And some of the commentaries I read use the name of messenger angel, but I didn't see that, maybe I missed it, in the Hebrew, but we've got God and man contending with Jacob, whose name in the Yabuk is a wonderful play on those words. There's a lot of that going on. You have darkness, so the demon of the dark, because if he could see God, he died, and yet he's wrestling with God. But now you've got the river gods that he's already brought his family through, and I don't know what this is. I love the different names and the emphasis on the names here, because that's going to carry over.
In a really important way.
I don't really know what to do with this. To concentrate on the names is fabulous, because there's all the wordplay. We don't know who Jacob is wrestling with. It's fear of Esau, but it's the contending of the wrestling that sets him up to be okay somehow. And it goes much better than he ever expected. And a total side note to all of this. When Jacob is getting ready to meet Esau, Esau's coming. He sends ahead of him all these presents. Who is this from? This is a gift from my lord Esau. More presents. Give this to Esau from his brother Jacob. Sending on before him, not just splitting the companies, but sending these gifts, all these livestock, all these presents to Esau, to soften Esau's heart before he gets there. And for me, this is one of those glorious examples that this is already part of a folk tale, as Tanner said, so many different possibilities here. And we've got the demons, you've got the gods of the river, but sending the presents ahead. This is one more time that an actual folk story was taken from biblical stuff, because you've got Puss in Boots, who wins for his master. There were 3 brothers. Father dies. The first gets most of the inheritance. The second gets the donkey, and the third gets the cat that bewitches or explains the talking cat. And he sends presents on ahead to the king of the country and gets his master a bride for a wife. And it's taken directly from this story, which for me is a lovely completion, because we start out with a folktale, we end up with a folktale, but in the meantime, as Tanner said, there's some very important events going on here with the names. It's just an interesting old piece of literature that I'm not sure how to contend with or to strive with. For indeed, Israel is, Sarah is striving with, El is God. So Jacob has got a new name, a new position in society, for he has striven with God and won. I can play with names here for a while, but you
Names are
said
fun.
you really love this.
Well, and then you also have Peniel and
Oh, yes.
Penuel. I mean, two different words here, so, which is also fun.
So I have
Yeah.
a question then. If Jacob wrestles with God at night, because if he sees God, he'll die, let me go, for it is daybreak. If this is still God, we have light now.
Yes,
So,
that's where the possibility of the demon figure comes in, of the darkness.
oh,
Because we don't really know, Sandy. At least I haven't heard anything that's entirely convinced me. And Peniel, of course, well, is face of God, but then, as Tanner said, it switches a little bit here
Okay.
to Penuel.
But I like that. I think that there's an element of care in this as well, right? Like if Jacob is wrestling with God, and it's the darkness, and we know that that if you see the face of God, you die, right? Moses saw the back of his head,
Yeah.
and had an experience of whitened hair and aura and all that
Face
fun
shining.
stuff, right?
Yes.
So if that's an aspect of this where it becomes care, right? Let me go, for day is breaking is also let me go, because if you see my face, it's all over for you,
yeah.
right? And so that's a lovely like piece of this, right, as well. And you have the darkness, and you have the river, and you have all of the random things that go into it as well. But I think that's a fun little, just, drop in the bucket right in the middle of the text, because why not? So yeah, I think that's cool. I had never actually thought about it that way until you were talking about the face of God thing. So
And somehow this encounter has strengthened the name change, striven with God, and the encounter of successfully striving with God, and the pre-plan to set up for acceptance in his brother's eyes. They have this, following this text, they have this wonderful conversation. And Jacob is terrified but goes forward, and Esau runs to meet him. Emphasis then on your word for care.
Yep.
Absolutely. Because all of a sudden, everything is turned around, and the presents are a way of Jacob apologizing for what he's already done to his brother, because he took his blessing, and he did. And now they make up, but it's a funny making up, because Esau hasn't come to his house. Well, he never does. He goes ahead with all kinds of nice words, but Esau establishes his family in a different sector of the land than Jacob comes back towards, but not all the way to Bethel. So things are almost but not quite. It's a very strange situation, because he doesn't quite go back to where he said. He certainly doesn't go and write his brother, and yet when they make up and they're friends again and they're brothers and it's good, but it doesn't follow through one more time, kind of like we would expect it. And this last piece, therefore the Israelites do not eat the fine muscle that is in the hip socket. Yeah, they do. That's not quite right either. So it's just...
not only is it a random end to a text, but it is also not historically accurate.
Right. And it belongs in that part of the
Oh, it
text.
does. It absolutely belongs there.
They go
But-
together, but nothing quite works the way we expect it to here. At least not the way I expect it to here.
Yeah.
It's confusing.
Yeah. It's a lovely thing. I have two thoughts. A
Please.
short thought and a longer one, right? My first thought is, because I don't think that you can skip over this in light of the world around us. Tell me what the biblical definition of marriage is after you read the opening verse of this text. Jacob got up, took his 2 wives and his 2 concubines. It's maids, but he's had children by them, right?
Children.
And his 11 children, and crossed the ford, right? This is Genesis. Tell me the biblical definition of marriage one more time. I'm just saying, okay? Where I would like to go with this text, and where I think I might roll it into Luke, is I had a colleague, Sarah is her name, who is a pastor, I think in Indiana now. And she is a disabled person, right? And talks about ableism regularly and what that looks like in the church, and brings that up a lot when it comes to the biblical text. And her challenge to us this week was, what does it look like to have a conversation about this text and the text in Luke that we're going to get to in light of disability and ableism, but also in terms of just aging and what our bodies can and can't do anymore. And so I'm just going to read to you what she put into the world because I think it's lovely. And then I want to talk a little bit about it as well. So she writes, this weekend, the church has an incredible opportunity to hear the story of Jacob Israel in a transformative way. Often this text is used to bolster a commonly preached perspective on the gospel. God's mind can be moved, persistence is faithful. The widow wins over the unjust judge with her persistence, and Jacob persistently wrestles with God all night, earning himself a limp and a new name. But what would it mean to see wrestling with God and earning a limp as a blessing and not a form of faithful persistence? How might a disability lens change the story of Jacob Israel into seeing all disability as a gift, a new way to see and experience the restorative justice of God? Why would folks today need to hear that they're aging and changing bodies, that the ways of society excludes them because of their inability to live up to a ridiculous standard of health versus wholeness, are opportunities to live into God's redeeming covenant? Why must the church proclaim disabilities as the ultimate freedom of a Christian, moments and places in time and permanence when we see God working in new and redeeming ways that are most obvious when we eat and drink, when we take the disabled Christ into our disabled bodies? So the conversation that flowed out of that on one of the Facebook pages that I'm part of has been, what does it look like to see our limps as blessings from God, as examples of when we have experienced God and continue to live out the grace and faithfulness of God? And so at council on Tuesday night, I read this text with this in mind, and we talked about scars. So I have right here on my arm, I don't know if you can see it, this lovely, 4.5-inch long scar, all right, that I got as a pastor here at All Saints Lutheran Church. When we were remodeling this space, Dick will remember this, we were ripping out the old gross carpet in what is now the nursery space. And while we were ripping that all out one day, you were there, I think, Ev, Dennis, but a whole bunch of people were there. We were ripping it out, we were cutting it and pulling it and cutting it and pulling it, and it was glued down, and a piece of it gave way real fast, and it had a sharp edge on it, and it sliced all the way up my arm. And this was when I was first a pastor here, so note, before I was married to Katie, right? Dating an ER nurse, but not yet married to her. And so my solution to that, which would have been, it would have been stitches, right? It was pretty rough, was to take off my hoodie, wrap it around it, throw some duct tape around that, and go about the rest of my day, which is what we did. And then I just mopped up the little bit of blood that was on the floor in the nursery. Because it was the concrete floor, it's fine. But whenever I see this scar, all that I think about was how much fun it was to get to know these guys and to do all this work on this building after I first got here. And all I can picture is Dennis, who, for some odd reason, the man who is terrified of heights, who we always put in the lift to go up to the top of the building, right? And Dwayne, who stands on these ladders to change out the swags, and all of the work that you have done and that Ev has done, and now we have this whole new crew of property folks who have come in and who are continuing to do work on this building in which we gather and make these changes to the space in which we gather that is so special to us. And that, I don't think about the fact that there's a little bit of blood stain underneath the carpet in there, probably. I think about the fact that it was so meaningful to be a part of that. And this text, this text from Genesis indicates that for the rest of his life, Jacob walked with a limp. a constant reminder that he wrestled with God, right? Not only his new name, right, but literally a physical reminder that as he walked around day in and day out, he woke up on a cold morning in his tent and it was a little stiffer than usual, right? That he had wrestled with God. And that becomes this reminder for him forever. And I think that we all have scars of some sort, right? From accidents and experiences that we've had. And they might not remind you of Jesus, but they remind you of friends or of family. At council the other night, we had multiple guys on the council talk about the scars above their eyes from where their sisters had thrown a brick at them of some sort as a child. So that's fun. I managed to avoid that with my sister, which I'm grateful for. But we have memories attached to these scars. But this text makes it clear that those memories are good and holy, but also that as we age, as our bodies change, as we are unable to do things as we used to be able to do them, the things that stick with us that are physically disabling to us in some way or another are not bad. Indeed, they prove that we have lived life. And whatever those experiences might have been that got us to this point, might not always feel great and might not always feel like a blessing, as I'm sure that Jacob did not feel like walking away limping was a real great blessing. But I'm sure also that it was a reminder for the rest of his life that there are moments that are worth injury in living out our lives as well. So that's what I've been thinking about, which has nothing to do with with all of the wonderful language that goes into it, because it is fascinating. But that's what I've been thinking about a little bit this week, and I'm curious what you think about that.
So the first thing I go to, and I can't see, I mean, I have limps and aches and pains and scars, but I have tinnitus. You know, how is that a blessing from God? How is it, what point in my life do I think, well, I remember when it finally hit me in the head, oh, that's what that buzzing in my head is. Because no one else was hearing it, obviously. Sure. And, but I gotta think on that, because totally it's not a blessing, and I don't feel it's from God. So.
Right. and I'm not saying that every ache and pain that we have is we should,
but it's a twist on how to
God.
think about it.
Yeah. How do we think about the experiences of our lives that make us who we are today, that change who we are? I mean, right? This resulted in a name change that was pretty significant. I mean, the concept of Israel that persists to today did not exist until this happened. Right? Like, that is not just a life-changing event, but literally a world-changing event that persists throughout history. So you might not have a limp that changes the world, but what are the experiences of our lives that change us? You know, for better, for worse, or just because.
And it's the memories that are so important.
Yeah, to share the stories and to share the memories and to pass them along and do
It's
the
our
things.
crazy secretary.
Yeah.
Message for you, all of you. Sally just called and she wanted me to let you know that she's doing great.
Sally's doing good. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
What did you
Marvelous.
say? Sally, something about Sally. I didn't.
McCartan, she had surgery yesterday and she's doing very, very well.
Hopefully we'll get home today if she's not already.
Hopefully, yeah.
Joan wanted to let us know that the Jerusalem Bible, which is the one that she uses, uses naming Israel because you have been strong against God, not the striving against, but the strong against, which is fine. And in the last verse, it names the sciatic nerve, which is in the socket of this hip.
Oh my.
Which is fascinating. I don't know if sciatic nerve is in the original Hebrew.
I missed it, but then I missed things.
Well, there you go.
I'll
So
have
there
to
you
go and pay more attention.
That's just fine.
Not sure.
Yeah.
Look for that.
Uh-huh. Go back and
Go
find
back
it.
and
So,
say that again, yes. But for me, again, the names, how the names change, seeing God face to face, Peniel. And yes, now all of a sudden we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and we've now got Israel and the people, and it will go on from Joseph to Egypt, and the people become a people and gather in a lot of other people at the same time.
Mhm, yeah.
So it's really phenomenal. They gather people from all over. Okay. So we come out of the darkness in the rivers and the very strange text here into Psalm 121, which is just such a gift and such a blessing. And the echoes in Psalm 121 with, Psalm 23 and God's care for the individual. And then as that broadens for all the people who come to lift their eyes to the Lord. This is a glorious psalm. Psalm number 2, 121, of 15 psalms all grouped together. Each one starts out with a song of ascents, identically for the 15. And ascending, crawling up a hill. The pilgrims go up from the north and from the south to the temple on the hill, to Mount Zion, to the Jerusalem temple. There was no temple there until the time of David, and Solomon completed that temple. And then the different exiles, the second one, the Babylonian exile, wiped out the temple. And so people lifted their eyes to the hills around Jerusalem or to the mountains, and then individuals lift their eyes and face their own mountains. The pilgrims going back to Jerusalem, going back to Mount Zion, climbing up the hill, singing the songs of praise, these 15, song of ascents, of going up, ascending, and praising God, and being reassured of God's presence. This is a magnificent psalm. They're short, they're giving praise. 121 is reaching up as they climb up. 122, they've already arrived. And then one day the temple is gone. And the psalm is still being sung of God's care for God's people, for the individual, without naming a specific crisis, but naming God's guard. The word shamar, guard or keep, recurs and recurs and recurs throughout this psalm as God keeps the people safe and clear. So, Tanner, you read this at North Square the other day. Would you read this again?
Yeah.
121.
Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. The Lord will not let your foot be moved, nor will the one who watches over you fall asleep. Behold, the keeper of Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will preserve you from all evil, and will keep your life. The Lord will watch over your going out and your coming in, from this time forth forevermore.
Amen. The first two verses, the individual, I lift my eyes to the mountains. From where does my help come? My help comes from the maker of heaven and earth, the creator of heaven and earth. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Abraham, before Melchizedek, celebrates the God, the maker of heaven and earth. And here in the psalm it's repeated, and in the Apostolic Creed. I believe in God the Father, the maker or creator of heaven and earth. This is totally comprehensive. The Lord's the maker. Everything is under God's control. And then from Psalm 3 on, the assurances that God guards, keeps, does not let foot move, does not let you slip, does not sleep, always is attending against evil, against problems, for one's protection, for the individual, for Israel, for the community of faith who follows God. I mean, this is beautiful stuff. As you look at it, Psalms are verses 3 through 8. Is there a favorite one? This echoes Psalm 23, where God leads, the good shepherd leads by the still waters, restores the soul, protects, prepares the table in front of the enemies. Goodness and mercy follow all the days of your life, and you will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The Lord, in Psalm 21, will keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forever. There's so many echoes, there's so many of the biblical themes here. The Lord's Prayer is here, like I said, Psalm 23, Melchizedek. This is incredibly comprehensive. As you look through this, does one of the verses really stick to your mind? Is there one of those verses of God's protection that really matters?
I like verse 8.
Mm-hmm. I like verse 7. God will keep you. The Lord will keep you from all evil. Will keep your life. And our buddy Israel is mentioned here too, which is kind of fun. God will not let your foot be moved. Do you have a favorite one, Abby?
We read this psalm at my husband's funeral,
Ah,
so it has meaning, I guess,
yeah.
all of it.
That comprehensive protecting, not just keeping our life here, but from then on and forevermore. Those are powerful words, Abby. Wow. Jerry, sorry. Good heavens, my apologies. But yeah, thank you. That's beautiful.
Yeah, when I open to it, I have Jim's name and a star by it.
Ah,
And I think that partly for me now I don't remember if I have that as part of his service.
mhm.
But if I didn't actually have it, I was thinking of him when I read it, and I think both of us.
Right.
Because one of my favorite is "Lo, I'm with you always." And this reinforces everything.
Right. I love this little psalm sits very happily within its, other 14 psalms. But it does echo so many different parts of the Bible and the reassurance of God. And the Apostles' Creed. Wow. God will protect you. It just as if they all come together here. Psalm 23 is certainly one of our favorites. But Psalm 121. And when we were at North Square yesterday, Tanner had us sing a song that echoed this song, which was, I lift my eyes up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lift my eyes up.
Right. So this is just beautiful, in every which way it goes.
You going to sing it on Sunday?
I don't know yet.
Please.
We'll think about it.
Certainly it's in the,
We'll consider it.
It's on.
It's not currently in the bulletin, I don't think. I should really check that and make sure.
You don't always do things according to the bulletin.
No,
Let me
that's why I
just
don't
say
hand them
that.
out anymore.
Yeah.
It's very important that I don't. It's helpful.
We wouldn't know the difference, we don't have them.
Yeah.
Good, yeah, and that's exactly right.
Yeah.
anyway, this clearly connects, at least I hear the connections to Genesis 32, to the very beginning, and this leads up into Luke.
Yes, it leads into Luke. Shall we roll to Luke? Sure. Luke chapter 18. Looking at verses 1 through 8 today. And we are, coming on the tail of chapter 17, obviously, which is where we've been for a bit. Last week we had Jesus cleansing the 10 lepers. And then the part that we skip over at the end of chapter 17, verses 20 through 37 roughly, is the coming of the kingdom. And so when Jesus is asked when the kingdom of God is coming and what to look for, he says, don't look for big signs and don't look for big wonders and don't look for all of those fun things. Just recognize the fact that the kingdom of God is already here. and you're living in it now, and it's important that you live it out in a loving sort of way. But then he says, but there's trouble coming, and you need to be ready for that. And he goes on and on and on about that for several verses, which is lovely. And I'm grateful that we're skipping over it this time. And he mentions Lot's wife, who you may remember got turned into a pillar of salt. So, you know, like, trouble. Not just like, oh, this is going to be, you know, difficult for a while, but like, you know, pillar of salt trouble. Like, there's trouble. And then following on that immediately is this text, which is fun, I don't know, weird. And I'm curious what you think about it. And so I will read it for us today. Luke 18, 1-8. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. And he said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. And in that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, grant me justice against my opponent. For a while the judge refused, but later he said to himself, though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? What do you think? What do you like? What do you not like? What sticks out to you?
I went to Shawshank Redemption last night.
Oh,
movie.
yeah.
The persistence.
The persistence.
Yeah.
What's the parable about?
Prayer.
Prayer?
Don't give up.
Prayer and not giving up, right? I mean, it says it right in the front. It's really nice that Jesus just says it, right? Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart, right? So that's nice that we know what it theoretically is supposed to be about. You will be surprised at how many commentaries and sermons have absolutely nothing to do with prayer and not losing heart. There's all kinds of things that people find and pull out of this text for various reasons. And there's a lot of random stuff here, right? It's kind of an odd text because on the surface, right, on a very surface level reading of this, you can read it and say, if I pray enough, God will eventually get annoyed and grant me my prayers.
But will they be what you prayed for, or what God
well, if
thinks
they're
is
not, then they'll
best?
just keep praying.
Yes,
right?
that's
like
true.
that's the
Yeah.
idea here, is that I want these things,
Yeah.
and if I am annoying enough to God, God will definitely grant them. But that is an assumption that says that we are the widow, and that God is the unjust judge. Now, I don't mind us being identified in the person of the widow. Do have a bit of an issue with God being identified as the unjust judge. And so my hope is that we can kind of break that apart a little bit. Because I think that what the text is actually doing is it's first of all not a story about God, it's a story about us, first and foremost, right? This is a story about the widow, right? Who we know is whenever widows come up in the text, right? It's people who are at risk, people who are on the margins, people who are vulnerable, people who we are charged to care for. But also, in addition to that, they are prophets. They are active. They are faithful. Right? Every time the story of a widow comes up, they're held up as examples of the faith, right? Despite the fact that they are vulnerable in society, they are held up by Jesus as examples of the faith, as people who are active in the faith. You have the widow with her 2 coins, right? And how that is the most faithful that you can be. You have this example of somebody who has no standing or status in the community, and yet is constantly going to one of the most powerful people in the community and demanding justice again and again and again. And that persistence becomes an aspect of who the identity of the widow is in these texts as well. And so I think I think these stories are lovely because of that. But I'll say that again, that this is less a story about God and more a story about us and who we are. And so then it becomes what is our call in this? When you have these concepts of justice and persistence, what is this story telling us to do? Continue to pray and be persistent in justice, right?
Yeah, stand up for.
So Barbara Lundblad preached a sermon a couple years ago called "Nevertheless She Persisted," because why not? And asked the question, is this a parable about prayer, justice, or faith? And her response was, yes, it's about all of those things, right? It's about all three of those things. But then she said, if we pray without working for justice, our prayers are empty. Right? If we pray for justice in the world, but we don't actually go out and actively do it, like the woman did not just sit in her home and pray that God would change the mind of the unjust judge, right? She went out and she yelled at him day after day after day after day after day, right? If we work for justice without prayer, then we assume that everything that happens is on us, and we don't lean on God. Right? If we pray and we work for justice without faith, we will despair when justice isn't done. If we pray and we work for justice, but we do not have faith, then we will despair when justice isn't done. The idea there being that we can pray and we can work for justice, but if it doesn't happen, because things happen in their own time, and sometimes they take a long time, and sometimes justice doesn't come in the way that we want it to, sometimes justice just doesn't happen. And that's awful. But it happens, right? Without faith, we become mired in that ugliness, right? Prayer and justice and faith, what Jesus had joined together, she argues, let nobody put asunder. Right? These are the things that are they're vital that they stay together because they work off of one another to guide us and to help us and to build us up. There are some really lovely translation pieces in this text. They get skipped over. So when we think about parables from Jesus, it is useful to remember that pretty much every single time Jesus tells a parable, it's very pointed, and is meant to have an edge. So I would imagine that regardless of what translation you have, it probably says something along the lines of, in verse 5, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming. The translation here is literally, beat me black and blue. Like, that's literally the meaning in the Greek. Give me a black eye would be a more accurate translation, as opposed to wear me out. Now that's important, because when we think about people who are in power, who have power over others, which includes us, to some extent at least, it's really easy for people in power to ignore needs, to ignore justice, to ignore the call and the cry of the oppressed, if it's not going to impact us in any way, shape, or form. It's a lot harder to ignore the needs of the oppressed if we're walking around with a black eye, right? If every time we ignored somebody who was in need, we got a black eye, and everybody in the world that looked at us knew that we had ignored the needs of somebody who was oppressed, we would probably stop ignoring the needs of the oppressed, right? Like, if there was some sort of a visible thing on me, if I got a big Sharpie mark on my forehead every time I ignored God's call in my life, I would probably really think a lot more about God's call in my life. And that's the translation. That's what's being said here, is that she's becoming an embarrassment. People are starting to notice that this unjust judge keeps coming to him, this widow keeps coming to this unjust judge, and it's getting around. People are talking about it in the coffee shop and on the street corners, that he is not giving her what everybody knows is justice. And so he's losing his reputation. And people are stopping inviting him to dinner parties, and they're avoiding him on the street corners, right? He's not the powerful, important person that he was before this started. And so he's saying, maybe to avoid a black eye, I should just give her justice. Now, is that how God works? I don't think so. It wasn't meant to be a trick question. I'm sorry. I don't think so. I don't think that that's how God works. Now, does God answer our prayers in the time we want them to be answered most of the time?
No.
Rarely. Which is super frustrating and incredibly annoying. And it doesn't deny that we should continue to persist in prayers, right? But the other part of that persist in prayers is the not lose heart. And that's the argument from Pastor Barbara Lundblad, that prayers and persistence and working for things is important, but having faith when things don't go exactly how we expect them to go or want them to go is equally important. And sometimes it's hard for us to have faith. The blessing of the community that we are part of is that we have other people's faith that we lean on as well, which is why it's so important that we have. I mean, that's the core and the crux, I think, of Christian community, is that sometimes my faith sucks, right? So the third leg on my stool is not holding up like it should be, but other people have stools that I can sit on. Other people are willing to hold me up in the midst of that. Any other things that you see in this text that stick out? So to be clear, my argument is that in verse 7 there, and will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay long? I tell you, he will quickly grant them justice. I think that Jesus is saying this is not how God operates, that there is injustice in the world and amongst people, and God does not act in that way. God grants justice quickly. However, the ways of the world often work against what God desires for justice. And so it is important that we as faithful people continue to work for justice in the world around us, to pray persistently, right, and not lose heart, but also to work for justice, because the ways of this world tend to work against God as well. And God operates within what God can operate within, and that is us. God has chosen to operate through us. And so if we want to see justice in the world, we shouldn't expect lightning bolts. We should expect work.
I think a lot of it could be what is our perception of justice. More than likely is not God's perception of justice.
Sometimes, right? I mean, I like to hope that our perception of justice, occasionally at least, lines up with God's perception of justice. But yeah, there are things that, I mean, clearly, we're in the midst of political season, right? Like, clearly, there are differing views on what people think of as just, what people think of as our rights, and on both sides of the aisle, on every side of the aisle, on the 47 different sides of the aisle, there are people who consider God's justice to be what they want it to be.
It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't work for them, and it doesn't work for me either, right? That's not how it works. Just because I went to God's school and have an MDiv doesn't mean that I have the corner market on what God intends to be justice in the world. I mean, I think I have a generally fairly good idea, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to agree with me. In fact, I guarantee that they don't. My experience says otherwise. Right? And so what does it mean then to continue to work for justice, knowing that in faith, things might not always go our way?
And then the really important part, the last part of the first verse, to not lose heart.
To not lose heart, right? Because then, and that echoes then verse 8. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Right? That's the not losing heart part. and again, echoing chapter 17, right? The kingdom of God is now. Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt kind of trouble coming. Will you persist in faith? Despite the troubles in the world that we see, will you persist in faith? Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes we don't. So, all right, that's what I'm thinking about.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Also, my battery's about to die on the iPad, so goodbye, everybody. Just in case it suddenly goes away, that's why.
And next week there won't be a Bible class.
Yes, next week we will not have. I'm away on continuing education, and Pastor Rebecca is away as well, and so we will have Norris Square next Wednesday. Pastor Rebecca will lead that, but we will not have Bible study next week.
Apologies to you, that just
I'm sorry about that.
unfortunately worked wrong.
Sometimes our schedules come in together quite nicely. Sometimes they don't. But that next Sunday, the 23rd, we are welcoming our new vicar. And we're going to have cupcakes and do fun things and do all that sort of stuff. So do come and join us for all that.
So we'll see you next week.
Yeah, we will.
Sorry.
All right, blessings all.
Okay.
Thank you.